CVM's deck tech. You can certainly check that out on our coverage page. Again, Brian Bronwyn and CVM playing the exact 75. They're both 6-1. CVM 6th place on our leaderboard. Andrew Shrout, number 28 for our seasonal rankings. We'll be following with the rankings like this all year long as players try to accumulate Open Series points to qualify for our end-of-year Players Championship. VanMeter has an actual shot here at being the Season 1 champion.
Yeah, no, he definitely posted some good results. He's clearly active about attending the Opens early on this year, as his drive out to Indianapolis indicates. I would expect to see him actually at all the January shows. I would not be surprised to see him at all 4.
I would not be surprised either, even to make him maybe make a trek to Orlando to go to that show. I wouldn't be surprised. Columbus, I think it's a lock that he'll be there.
If he's here, he might as well be at Columbus,
yeah,
right?
I think
Baltimore's not.
That's not far. I know he'll go to that show too.
Yeah.
So the only one probably in question is Orlando, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's chasing points. And I know he intends to play a whole lot of Magic this year, that he would make the trek to Orlando. Shrout, kind of in the same area, honestly. He's obviously got more points to acquire, but he's kind of in the same area as VanMeter. He lives in the Kentucky area, so he could go to Columbus. He could go to Baltimore if he wants to make a longer drive. He obviously made the trip over here. It's about 3.5 hours from where he lives, so maybe we'll see more of him as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of you watching the coverage are familiar with Chris from a couple of years ago, back when the Open Series Players Club was a little bit different. And CVM successfully leveled himself to the highest level. He went to everything.
Yes.
I mean, when he was chasing points,
he went to everything.
He went to everything. So it would not surprise me to see Chris become a real fixture of the Open Series this year.
The man likes the game.
He does.
It's just that simple. So we'll see if he's able to work his way towards. And he said in his article at the beginning of the year that his goal is to be playing the Players Championship at the end of this year. And I know when he was goal-oriented and wanted to be level 8 many moons ago, that he was able to get the job done and do that. So we'll have the Beard, yes, the true Beard, Soldier of the Pantheon, going to start here for Shrout. Be on the draw. He's going to play a Stomping Ground tap and pass it back.
So whose side of the matchup would you like to be on here? It's obviously these are two decks we don't see a ton of.
I think I want to be on the green-red side because they have mana acceleration.
I feel the same for the same reason.
I think the fact that you can get out ahead of the green-white deck is a really, really big deal. Now, VanMeter doesn't have Elvish Mystic or Sylvan Caryatid this game, so he's off to a much slower start. And what that's going to allow Shrout to do is make his cards that cost a little bit more mana but are still powerful actually not get trumped ahead of time. So, he'll have Advent of the Worm, at a timely manner. Mm-hmm. Where he might not be able to do that otherwise because VanMeter is pushed ahead and Shrout would have to use Advent of the Worm defensively. But now he can actually use it offensively, and that is a big change in how good the card can be.
Yeah, and Advent is an incredibly powerful card. Doesn't get to see a ton of play relative to its power level because the deck building cost is so high. The colored mana requirements are so significant, but made no mistake about it. In control matchups, it's your best card, and in beatdown mirrors as well, it's your best card.
Shrout could have played a Celestial Charm on the end step there to take a 2/2 and just kind of keep forcing through some damage. However, he opts to hold it, and I think for good reason. He's in a matchup where, his opponent has some very large creatures in the deck. You see there's a Pelucranos in VanMeter's hand right now. There are other ways to increase the power there with Gore-Clan Rampager and Boonsater and stuff like that. So I think that the mode that Shrout's going to be using the most here with Celestial Charm is actually the exile target creature with power 5 or greater. I think making a 2/2 is going to be rather irrelevant a high percentage of the time, but +2/+2 and Trample could certainly come up as well to be able to trade up, as here's a Pelucranos right now. And this is part of the reason, again, that I think he opted to hold that Celestial Charm.
Yeah, it's very unlikely the game is going to come down to a lot of little pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to certainly Andrew deck does have some beatdown draws, and that's good if he can get those. But it's going to come down to who can get the last big impactful creature to stick.
And there's an immediate exchange that I'm not surprised to see at all there of make an Advent of the Worm, Celestial Charm, your Pelucranos, get in here for 7 points of damage. Now you're facing down a 5/5 Trampler, and you have to play defense. And the last time we watched VanMeter play, the defensive capabilities of this deck were not very impressive.
No, it's definitely a deck about getting out on the front foot and then leveraging the big creatures and all of your mana that way.
Skylasher's going to come into play. Shrout immediately shows VanMeter a Banisher Priest, says, I've got it all. Your Pelucranos is no good, and Shrout is going to win game 1 here very, very quickly with his green-white aggro deck against VanMeter and his green-red monsters deck. Again, you have to remember one thing, too. Shrout, this was a deck that was on no one's radar coming into the Invitational. And he was able to top 8 that tournament with just a deck that, when you look at the deck list, it's like, I mean, this version is a little bit different than the Invitational one, but it's just, how can you play this deck when the mono blue is, arguably one of the best decks in the format? But he really took the standard metagame by storm last weekend.
Yeah, and 2 Skylasher, 3 Mistcutter Hydra, and an additional good base of creatures. Not a bad place to start against Mono Blue Devotion.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, again, the previous weekend, a couple weeks ago in the Invitational, he had 4 Skylashes in his main deck, multiple Mistcutter Hydras in his main deck, Banisher Priest in his main deck. He was really geared towards beating Mono Blue Devotion. This week, he's cut back on some of those. He only has 2 Skylashers, just a few copies of Mistcutter Hydra in his main deck, but he does have the full 4 Banisher Priests, which are going to play a pretty important role in this matchup.
Yeah, they're going to be critical against any creature deck, especially ones with things like Pelucranos. I mean, just bodies that are bigger than yours.
We'll take a look at VanMeter's sideboard here first. He's got a copy of Rurik Thar. Not going to need that for this particular matchup. 4 copies of Mistcutter Hydra. Again, not very good in this matchup. 2 copies of Destructive Revelry. I think he's targetless.
Basically,
on Shrout's deck.
Well, we'll get to this in a minute.
Okay.
Not game 1, he's targetless.
Sure. 2 copies of Plummet, 2 copies of Mizium Mortars, and 2 copies of Chandra Pyromaster. Plummet, I don't think is really going to see very much action here either. Mizium Mortars is an easy card to board in, especially when you have the capability to overload it. And then 2 copies of Chandra Pyromaster, which, again, it's kind of slow. The deal 1 to something isn't going to be very relevant a high percentage of the time. I don't know if he's going to have enough time to actually use the 0 ability and actually generate some card advantage. So, unsurprisingly, the Green and Monsters deck does not have a sideboard geared towards beating green-white because, honestly, no one really plays this deck besides Shrout.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Chandra against decks with 4/4s and 5/5s.
Yeah.
It's really powerful against decks like Mono Red, Boros, the little Orzhov deck, things where, Chandra basically gets to be Visara in addition to everything else that's going on. It can also be pretty powerful against control decks because the ultimate gives you inevitability. When those things aren't the case, Chandra is pretty low power and difficult to defend, and I would be surprised to see Chris bring in here. On the other side, we have 3 copies of Unflinching Courage, which is really, really good against creature decks that don't have access to Doomblades and similar effects. So Chris is pretty exposed here. We talked about Destructive Revelry. Andrew obviously being targetless in the first game, but the post-board games, it's not unreasonable for Chris to assume that Unflinching Courage may be there. And he is drawing pretty slim to that on a large creature. So maybe he wants to bring in some Revelries, even though they aren't at their best. He has another Mistcutter Hydra and 2 Skylashers. I don't think he'll bring in. 2 copies of Pelucranos, I would expect to come in. 2 Last Breaths, not at their best here. 2 Rootborn Defenses. They are okay in my mind. They're good against overloaded mortars. Pretty good if the board gets stalled out, but there's going to be plenty of spots where it's not really doing very much. And then 3 copies of Glare Heresy. Of course, not for this matchup.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't expect either player to have a lot of sideboards for each other, and that looks like it's the case. Green and Monster is kind of a fringe deck that Chris and Brian may be putting back on the map this particular weekend for future weekends, but this is a great weekend to play this type of strategy because people aren't gunning for you. The same thing can be said of the green-white aggro deck that Shrout is playing where, outside of him, honestly, you don't really see very many people playing green-white, let alone this sort of build of green-white that is extreme, for lack of a better term, with main deck Skylashers, with main deck Mistcutter Hydras, and so many Banisher Priests in the main deck. It's not surprising to see 2 players here with these kind of rogue decks, without sideboards for each other.
Yeah, and another noteworthy part of Andrew's deck, 0 copies in the 75 of Loxodon Smiter.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, I'm not arguing that Loxodon Smiter is very good right now, but it is sort of been this Selesnya staple for as long as it's been printed. Of course, your green-white deck starts with 4 Loxodon Smiters. That kind of logic has been applied to the card for a long time, and Andrew is eschewing it and to make room for cards like Banisher Priest, Mistcutter Hydra, and Skylasher that he feels are better suited to this specific metagame.
And it's hard to argue against him with the success that he's had with the deck so far. All things being equal, as we'll see both players are going to lay out 7 cards. VanMeter will be on the play this game. He's looking to, again, accelerate his mana so he can deploy his threats faster than Shrout can actually keep up, because Shrout's threats can be outclassed pretty quickly from VanMeter's deck. And Soldier of the Pantheon probably shouldn't be dealing 6 or 8 points of damage if games go the way that VanMeter plans them to go.
Chris's deck with no acceleration is pretty anemic in my mind. It's really predicated on having accelerant to do things like second turn Domri or third turn Pelucranos. That's where the real power of the deck comes in. On the draw with no mana accelerant, he sort of just bumbled around and kind of died. He never really did anything that powerful.
Got crushed, honestly. Yeah. It was a pretty one-sided affair. Played a couple Pelucranos. A couple copies of Pelucranos, both were answered, and, he was dead and looking to his sideboard. He's got a hand that he's happy with this go-around. Kept it rather quickly. So we'll see if he does have an Elvish Mystic or a Sylvan Garrett to be able to ramp some things out. Again, Stormbreath Dragon, Gorkline Rampager, Pelucranos, getting a Domri or a Xenagos online, overloading Immortals. He's got plenty of things to do if he does have a lot of mana, but he's actually got to be able to generate that mana, which he wasn't able to do in the first game.
Yeah, it's definitely, like a lot of, Chris's deck is, of course, different from Devotion decks, Red Devotion and Green Devotion. It plays a lot of the same cards, and it's at some point predicated on doing something with a lot of mana, or jumping out of the gate really quickly. Those are two things we associate historically with Devotion decks. And the Red Green Monsters decks has a lot of the same kind of draws, but they're glued on having a Mana Elf or a Sylvan Caryatid instead of a Nykthos or something else.
All right, there is a Temple of Abandon for VanMeter. So, no mana accelerant to start. He's going to put the top card on the bottom and pass the turn back. Shrout is going to take his draw, experiment one off of the top. He does not have an untapped green or white land, so he's just going to play a Selesnya Guildgate and pass back. VanMeter draws a Mutavault. Does he have acceleration? He does not. So, two hands without acceleration, and a Mutavault is pretty telling about his second land drop as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's very likely that Chris does not have a third land.
There's a Fleece main line, and he doesn't. Hey, do you see a mountain there? And there's a Sylvan Caryatid off the top, a little late, but not so bad. Better late than never.
Fleece main line, a card that's received a lot of attention when Theros was spoiled, has kind of yet to live up to its hype, but we see it here in Shrout's list.
VanMeter has a Mutavault, 2 mountains, a Pelucranos over there. He's got Missing Mortars in his hand as well, so interested to see how he wants to navigate this game. I think the one thing he doesn't have is another source of green mana, so playing the Caryatid this turn might be very important for VanMeter. He's going to play a Mutavault, and he is going to play a Caryatid. And one thing I think that he's doing here, Patrick, is he's masking the fact that he has enough red mana from Mizzium Mortars to overload it. That's why you see him deploying Mutavaults, and he might just drop down a basic mountain next turn and kind of gloss over the fact that that's what he's got, as Fleece main line is going to come into the red zone. Temple Garden going to come to play untapped here for Shrout. See if he's just going to pass the turn back or deploy some threats. Some threats it is. Experiment 1. And Voice of Resurgence to evolve Experiment 1. So let's see what VanMeter wants to do on his turn. He's going to take a draw. It's a Temple of Abandon.
Well, now the mystery is going to be revealed about this, about the Mizzium Mortars. That Overload's going to be online because Chris is almost certainly playing his Temple this turn.
I think it's kind of interesting, right, where you can play the Temple, scry, play the Pelucranos, expect it to die, and then set up the Mortars the next turn. He's just going to play a Mountain. Okay. And he's going to play Stormbreath Dragon to hold the fort, maybe try to get Shrout to extend a little bit here.
Yeah.
Can't Selesnya Charm that for a multitude of reasons.
Or Banisher Priest, too. So this is, the Stormbreath Dragon is actually a better defender this turn than Pelucranos would be.
There is a forest from Shrout. Now he does have access to Advent of the Worm. Temple Garden provide the second green that he needs. See Shrout's board there, Voice of Resurgence, Experiment 1, which is a 1-1, and Fleece main line, which is a 3-3, and 1 mana away from going monstrous. Shrout deciding if it's time to deploy another copy of Experiment 1, or do I just leave mana up for Advent of the Worm?
I have to imagine that this is, since this is pretty clearly Advent of the Worm this turn, that Andrew is just trying to bluff with his body language.
Okay. Maybe reel him in a little bit here. If you're Shrout, you think, okay, what's the worst case scenario if my opponent plays a Mizzium Mortars with Overload next turn? I can play Advent of the Worm in response, raise the power level on my Experiment 1, remove the counters to regenerate it. I lose my voice, but I get the token, which is probably better anyway. As here comes Voice of Resurgence. Interesting.
So Andrew is saying that he's willing to essentially suicide his Voice of Resurgence in.
Yeah, he wants the token instead. Okay. Okay, I see exactly what he's doing here. So he suicides this, and it's gonna evolve both the copies of Experiment 1. Okay. So how good is Mortars right now?
Still seems pretty solid to me. I mean, he gets to regenerate one of his Experiment 1s, and Selesnya Charm can save another creature.
I think VanMeter is kind of priced in the situation of casting it. So Shrout does have a Selesnya Charm in his hand that he can give a creature +2/+2. So let's see how things would settle here. If If he does pump up the Voice Resurgence token, it becomes a 6/6 with 4 damage on it, but he'll lose an Experiment 1 and a Fleecemane Lion, so the Voice would actually die due to state-based. What's the best choice here? Maybe just saving the Fleecemane Lion?
Yeah, because Fleecemane Lion and Regenerating Experiment 1 also... yeah, this seems like the best save here.
Yeah. I leave him with the most stuff. I wonder if he wants to get in there with that dragon. Is it time to start racing now?
Oh, with a Peluknos in his hand, he has a reasonable amount of power in his hand.
It's certainly appetizing to want to start racing here. Shrout's got 1 card left in his hand. It's an Advent of the Worm. You know, you could attack for 4 here, put Shrout down to 14. Or yeah, attack Shrout, put him down to 14 with the dragon. Shrout draws his card, attacks for at least 4, maybe more. If he plays Advent of the Worm pre-combat, you evolve Experiment 1. If you draw land, you can put Monstrosity on the Fleecemane Lion. Maybe defenses, maybe a little bit better here because you just think your hand and your draws are better if you're VanMeter.
Yeah, I think it's hard. Chris to me feels like a pretty strong favorite if the game goes on for a long time. So
Sure.
I would be trying to hang back if I was in his seat.
Shrout draws a card, immediately puts a land into play for Fleecemane Lions. Now you can represent 2 different things here: Fleecemane Lions, Monstrosity activation, and Advent of the Worm. Now, of course, if you're VanMeter, you also are aware that, hey, the green-white deck has a lot of instant speed stuff. They've got Rootborn defenses, which clearly Shrout did not have this go around. They have Advent of the Worm, Boon Satyr. There are a lot of things that you can do with 5 untapped mana in a green-white deck. See, VanMeter scry with Temple of Abandon. Now he's considering, does he want to play his Pelukrinos? It looks like the answer is a resounding yes. So the 5/5 Legendary Hydra is going to come into play. Last 2 cards there are Sylvan Carrington and a Mountain for VanMeter, and now he is going to attack with a dragon. How do you like this shift here?
It feels a little risky. I mean, you know, Shroud's down to 1 card in his hand, so he basically needs to have a good card in his hand and then a good draw step, but this still feels like a risk that I would not be willing to incur if I was in.
Celestial Charm Banisher Priest really turned this game around for Shrout.
Right. For example, last turn, Chris with the land that he had left in his hand could have said go, passed, and Stormbreath Dragon could hold back again. Monstrous Stormbreath Dragon, and then untapped and started a race with a much shorter clock.
Sure.
He has a lot more ground to make up this way.
VanMeter's going to take the 5. He's going to go down to 12 from the Advent of the Worm attack. Shrout looks at his card, and he just passes the turn back. So VanMeter is going to take a draw after untapping his permanents. Let's see what he finds. It's a Domri. Gonna play a Mountain. Let's see what Domri represents in this game. Can tag Experiment 1. It's fine, nothing exciting. Can't take care of Fleecemane Lion because it can go monstrous in response. Maybe you just want to activate Stormbreath, make it so it's a 2-turn clock.
Yeah, I would. I mean, is Stormbreath Dragon not a 2-turn clock if he just hits this turn and plays Domri? The answer is no, right?
Yeah.
He goes to 10, and then it's only 7. So, yeah, Domri doesn't do a ton to advance Chris's board this turn. And if that's the case, it's probably best to ignore it.
Yeah, I think if you're VanMeter, you have to assume that, like, you know, what kind of outs does my opponent have to Stormbreath Dragon? Me just going Monstrosity, let's get this game over with in 2 turns. And I feel like the answer is not very many, and it looks like he comes to that conclusion as well. So he's going to attack with Stormbreath Dragon before damage, activate the Monstrosity on this, see if Shrout has a card to play. He does with a top deck Advent of the Worm. Okay, so a 5/5 is going to come into play for Shrout, and Experiment 1 is going to evolve into a 3/3. An attack here for 7 is going to put Shrout down to 7, facing lethal on the next turn. VanMeter is still okay.
Yeah.
Let's see what Shrout draws for the turn. Everyone's going to come into the red zone. How are you blocking?
Save the most damage. Pelukrinos in front of a 5/5, and wall in front of. I guess it kind of doesn't matter. It absorbs 3 on any block.
I think a top deck Boon Satyr gets it done, right? No matter what, because that accounts for 4 damage.
Yeah, I mean you can't.
Okay. All right. It's a forest. I was going to say a top deck Boonsader gets the job done there. But Shrout does not have it, so we'll go to a third one here between VanMeter and Shrout. Green-red monsters versus green-white aggro.
Yeah, and I was a little, that the way that game played out was why I was kind of concerned with Chris attacking with racing with the Stormbreath Dragon there.
Okay.
Was, of course, Andrew had to draw reasonably well to make that game close, but it still felt like Chris had a lot of action left over in his hand that he still didn't get a chance to deploy. And if he had taken a slightly slower pace of the game, I felt like he had a pretty big edge. The risk is if he sits around too long, I suppose that Unflinching Courage could just kill him. If he feels like he can't answer that card, then maybe that changes the equation some. It makes him more inclined to want to race.
I think I agree. See both players looking back at their sideboards. We'll do the same here. Again, VanMeter's sideboard of 1 Rurik Thar, 4 Mistcutter Hydras, 2 Destructive Revelries, 2 copies of Shock, 2 Plummet, 2 Mizium Mortars, and 2 Chandra Pyromaster. We like the Mortars. We saw the effect that it had in that game, especially when it is overloaded. One card I feel like I looked over a little bit when looking over initially was the card Shock.
Yes.
The fact that it can kill Banisher Priest, it can kill the first half of Voice of Resurgence, but you can argue that the back end of Voice of Resurgence is actually the better card in this matchup.
Yeah, to me, answering Banisher Priest, potentially Boonsader, Experiment 1, Soldier of Pantheon, if that card's still in the deck. Chris is, what he has to try to shore up in these games, in my mind, is falling too far behind early. He definitely has more power in his deck. He has things like overloading Mortars, Stormbreath Dragon, Mana Acceleration into the stuff. He's definitely favored if he can get out of the early turns without too much damage getting done. But he really needs to shore up his early game because that's where Andrew has an edge. And the fact that Andrew has so many Banisher Priests, to me, tips the equation over the edge. I think that Chris should certainly have Shock in his deck.
On Shrout's side, anything that we overlooked?
Not really. Again, it's just a question of whether or not he wants to have root board defenses. And that might be just a play draw issue. Okay. It's not the most efficient thing in the world, but there is some creature combat. There is a little populating that can happen. There is the threat of Mizium Mortars in Chris's deck. It's not zero utility, certainly, but it's not nearly as good here as it is against a deck like Esper or Blue-White that's leaning really heavily on Supreme Verdict to shore up your creatures.
Sure. If you guys are just joining us, Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Star City Games Open Series here in Indianapolis, Indiana. At SCG Live, hashtag SCGINDY for your tweets. We'll be checking them all weekend long as we are in round number 8 of 11. That is not a typo. There are 11 rounds, 712 players here in Indy. Came on down from all parts of the Midwest to play in our first Open of 2014. Looking to earn some points to qualify for the Invitational. And hopefully, for 16 lucky people, play the Players' Championship at the end of the year.
It's going to be a big one.
Yeah.
I'm already looking forward to covering that event, to be honest.
Trust me, it'll get here faster than you think.
Yeah.
It will not take very long at all to get here. Shrout is going to be on the play in this third and final game, as he did lose game number 2. So we'll see if he has a hand to his liking here. Looks like he's unsure. VanMeter, he is sure. He is going to send this back.
Third mulligan of the match, or fourth rather.
That's a lot of those.
Both players mulligan in game 1 and then Shrout on 6 in game 2.
Yep. I mean, one of these players will end up obviously with the win. We'll end up at 7-1. Still got a lot of work to be done though.
Yeah, this is essentially an elimination match from top 8 for one of these players, and then the winner still has, like you said, quite a bit of work in front of them.
3 more rounds after this, 9, 10, and 11. And again, it's very unlikely that in round 11, if either VanMeter or Shrout are 9-1 going to that round, that they'll be able to draw into the top 8 because there are, again, just so many people here.
Yeah. Big turnout.
Yeah.
As we expect from this part of the country.
Hey, this is the most fun part of the tournament. You're playing against a competent person. These guys obviously know each other pretty well. They go to a lot of the same Open Series events. And you're in an elimination match, you know. It's a pretty high-pressure environment. Obviously, both these guys want to get some more points, maybe try to be the Season 1 point earner for their qualification to the Players' Championship. But also, hey, everyone loves the top 8.
Yeah, of course. Especially if you're in Chris's position where you drove however many hours, 8 or 10 hours.
8 or 9 hours from Roanoke, yeah. He wanted to game. He also, I think more importantly, he wants to shave the beard. I think that's what it is. He feels like he has to go to all the tournaments now because he needs to get rid of this thing.
Yeah.
He made a promise. 4, 5, and 6. for the Bearded Warrior. Let's see what he can find. See if he can find mana acceleration for one of these games. Yeah, he's going to mulligan to 5, and you can see he's a little bit frustrated. Bad time to be doing it, obviously.
Yeah. These tournaments are, the tournaments are so long, and the margin for error that you have is so slim that moments like this can be particularly frustrating.
Yeah. The thing too is, speaking with VanMeter about the match that he lost, he said I felt like I played a great game in a game 3. He lost on turn 4 of extra turns. Like, I felt like I played a great game and made a bad block in the last turn of the game where I would have won on turn 5. And I'm like, man, that's really tough to take. You start the tournament 4-0, and that's how you end up getting your loss. He's like, yeah, it's really frustrating, but I'm just trying not to think about it very much. And now the second loss that he takes, inevitably, Mana Screw is going to come up at some point in the 11th round tournament at the wrong time. You like it for it to be maybe game 2 when you're up a game, or something like that, not game 3 when you're on the draw mulliganing. It's a pretty aggressive deck.
Yeah, and Chris, to his credit, is pretty zen-like in my opinion about how he approaches tournaments, and he very rarely gets flustered or aggravated, or even when he loses, just understanding that this is a long day and there's going to be bumps in the road.
He's going to lay out 5. Let's see if he can find the perfect 5-card hand. 4. He's got at least 1 land. All right, he says he's going to keep it. I think he's on a 1-lander. He's got a Mystic, too. And Shrout doesn't have an early offense, so there's a land and an Elvish Mystic. So he's got a backup Elvish Mystic. So maybe if he can find some red mana, play a turn 2 Domri, hey, you never know.
Yeah.
Take a draw. It's a Destructive Revelry. And there's another Elvish Mystic, and now a Scavenging Ooze. So, hey,
okay,
he gets to play some Magic here.
With red mana, this hand could be pretty solid.
I wonder what he's concerned about with Revelry being. Oh, Boon Satyr. Never mind. I'm trying to think of what it can kill. Yeah.
Unflinching Courage.
Yeah, sure. Okay, good card to sideboard in.
We didn't know. There was we were discussing it a little bit during the sideboarding. I would have believed either thing happened.
Sure.
If Chris brought it in, I wouldn't have been surprised, and if he didn't, I also wouldn't have been surprised.
Shrout has the Banisher Priest in his hand right now. He's also got a copy of Advent of the Worm. I think there's a Voice of Resurgence also hanging out, and he is going to deploy the Voice right now and pass the turn back. He doesn't really have a lot going on, so if a VanMeter can actually find a red source of mana, we're going to have a wildly different game here. Mizzing Mortars, he is far away from, however. And VanMeter does just have to pass the turn back. And, of course, this isn't the first time we've seen a 2-color deck have some mana issues. It's kind of funny that the 3-color decks have better mana than 2-color ones, but that just happens to be the case.
Yeah, most 2-color decks are, in reality, 1.5-color decks.
Yeah.
They're leaning heavily on 1-color mana and using some dual lands to splash a second color. The Red Green Monsters deck is a 2-color deck. It's playing a bunch of Force and a bunch of Bounds, a bunch of red stuff and a bunch of green stuff. So it's a lot more sensitive to its colored mana situation than a lot of the 2-color decks of the format that are actually 1.5-color decks.
Force Resurgence gets into the red zone. Shrout plays his 4th land, his 2nd green source, which means the Advent of the Worm is on. A mountain here from VanMeter turns on his hand now. So a step in the right direction for him. He can cast the Planeswalker. Mortars doesn't really have a very good target now, and obviously Revelry is targetless at this moment. But if you're VanMeter, you have to assume that a 5/5 Worm with Trample is coming in on your end step.
Yep. I can't imagine much else happening other than Domri plussing it and saying go.
Yeah. And even then, that's not that great of a turn, but what choice do you really have? It looks like he's going to cast Mortars.
You can go to plan B here, which is using this to make his Ooze a 3/3.
Yep. There's your Elemental token. And pass the turn back. So, unsurprisingly, a 5/5 is going to show up. So Shrout's going to quickly untap. He'll take a draw step again. Don't forget about the Banisher Priest that Andrew does have in his hand right now. Just draws a Temple Garden off of the top. Also has a Rootborn defenses as well. So things are going to get kind of hairy here for VanMeter.
Yep.
Again, I'm kind of with you where Rootborn defenses is a really situationally dependent card, but we are certainly in that situation right now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the ways that Chris can catch up in this game is with somewhere down the line in overloaded Mortars. Defenses shut that off, and just the board's also starting to get stalled, so creature combat's now a thing, and defenses can be powerful in that setup as well.
Slicing in Guildgate is what Shrout's going to play. Now he's going to play a Banisher Priest in the first main phase, likely going to be targeting the old Scavenging Ooze. Oh, wow, interesting. I take it all back. He's going to take care of Elvish Mystic. He says, all right, I'm going to remove that that Voice of Resurgence to turn my Ooze into a 3/3. And now Domri's looking a lot better.
It's possible that Andrew's hand is so powerful that all he's cared about is cutting Chris off of mana.
Okay. I thought we were going to immediately see that take care of the Scavenging Ooze. We'll see if that comes back to maybe hurt Shrout a little bit here.
I like him cutting off the mana here. If he has a Rootborn defenses, he has so much power in his hand. The game's not going to go on for that much longer unless Chris has a pretty awesome sequence of draws, and removing some of his mana shuts some of those doors.
Conservative attack here from Shrout. He could have got in there with the elemental token and traded with the ooze. He opts not to. Leads me to believe he has another Banisher Priest in his hand, as VanMeter's going to draw another mountain. So if he's able to find maybe another red source, he can find himself a little Dom reaction. Or excuse me, a little Mortars action. But first we're going to do a Domri. That's going to come into play. See if it's going to go up or down. Down is certainly the most appealing.
Using ooze to fight Banisher Priest.
Yeah, and get your elf back. I think that's the most appealing.
Putting another creature in the graveyard.
Yeah. Turn your ooze into a 4/4.
We're still without an answer to the worm, but the rest of the board is shored up at this point.
Crazy to me that a card like Ad from the Worm isn't seeing more play with how powerful it is. But, I mean, it really only, it's kind of pigeonholed into just one home, which is a deck like this. Here's 3 mana. Here is that other Banisher Priest that I felt he might have in his hand, which he did. So now he can go targeting this Scavenging Ooze. We'll see if Ooze does want to remove the other Banisher Priest in the graveyard, or maybe save that so that future Oozes that are drawn are better. VanMeter opts for the first part of that play, so he's going to remove that now. Push life total up a little bit, but Priest is going to take care of that Scavenging Ooze. And now the Voice of Resurgence token is happy to get in since it is a 3/3, and we do know that Shrout has a copy of Rootborn Defenses in his hand, so a pretty foolproof attack as Domri is going to bite the dust.
A little surprised to go under Domri there with how close the game is to being over, but
VanMeter going to look at the top card of his deck via Temple of Abandon. He does have his 3rd red source of mana. However, a card like Mizzy and Mortars, which wasn't going to be great here in the first place, would certainly be fine. But Rootborn Defenses, locks that plan out. Also, Rootborn might be able to just get cast here at the end of turn to make another 5/5.
Yeah, I think that's most likely what's happening here. It's really hard to imagine Chris surviving combat without throwing his elves in the mix here. So
you can see he's trying to figure out a way that he can work himself out of this situation. I'm not sure that one does exist. Again, he's staring at Destructive Revelry in his hand, which did not line up appropriately for this particular game. Again, there are cards that Shrout does have targets for. He does have Unflinching Courage. He does have Boon Satyr as targets for Revelry, but
some high-impact targets.
Yeah, neither of those cards showed up in this game.
And Chris was already on 5 cards to start off, too.
So you can't afford – it's basically a mulligan to 4 at that point. You can't afford for that card to be dead. You need the draw to line up appropriately that your Revelry does something. Even blow Shroud out in some fashion.
I think Chris is saying that he's passing the turn.
Shrout, again, taking a conservative approach where it would be very easy for him to just cast that Rootborn Defenses, but he opts not to. He's going to play a Voice of Resurgence pre-combat so that if VanMeter does have some sort of instant nonsense, it'll net Shrout an Elemental token. Shrout feels like it's time to block, so he's going to get in front of that Voice of Resurgence token. VanMeter's going to go down to 7.
And now this Reborn Defenses really shuts the door.
There's a Pelucranos. I'm just going to pass the turn back here. You see Shrout's going to do some math here, saying, okay, can I make another 5/5 or maybe another Elemental token, which would be a 5/5? He says, yes, I will. I'm going to cast this just to populate. I'm going to make a 5/5 in some fashion, either a Worm token or an Elemental token. Either one's going to be a 5/5. It'll be a Worm since it does have Trample. He's going to quickly untap, and I think we're going to see everybody come into the red zone in a second here.
Maybe not Banisher Priest to be safe, but
sure.
Yeah. We're going to see a lethal attack here.
Yeah, and that is going to do it. So Andrew Shrout is going to win this match, and his top 8 dreams are still alive.